All right. So a couple of updated comments, and just to make sure that you all followed what happened there, the FCC responding to complaints or requests from Chattanooga and Wilson overruled North Carolina and Tennessee restrictions on networks being able to expand beyond their borders. Wilson did expand their network. Later, the Sixth Circuit found that the FCC had exceeded its authority, so reinstated the laws in North Carolina and Tennessee. And at that point then, Wilson was out of compliance, having built to Pine Tops, which is outside of Wilson County, where it should be noted Wilson is the electric provider because they provide electricity to much of the surrounding areas. So there's this odd situation in which we were looking at it, and Pine Tops would continue to have fiber optics to the home, but Wilson would only be allowed to use them to monitor electric meters. You have to turn them off and make sure people could not use them for internet access. So Pine Tops in this period is freaking out, and Wilson reads the law more closely and sees that the law prevents them from offering service for a price. So they stopped charging for 6 months to give Pine Tops an opportunity to take their case to the legislature, which is actually exactly what Representative Marilyn Avila had said should be done when a law is not working the way it's supposed to. The legislature was not particularly receptive to giving Wilson an exemption and allowing them to keep this network. At which point, and this for me, it might seem like a little bit of a detour, but is really important to me, Hurricane Matthew devastates parts of North Carolina, including Pine Tops. And Wilson goes out and immediately starts setting up shelters. Pine Tops town commissioners are driving to Raleigh constantly to lobby on this. That's how important it is to them. So they don't get their exemption entirely. What they get is a result in that is that Wilson can continue to operate the network as long as no other provider comes in to offer services, which is not, the language is not much more clear than that. And so we kind of suspect that there was a deal among the cable providers behind the scene that Suddenlink would come in and build out in the area and thereby force Wilson to disconnect. It's not clear that if Suddenlink builds to 3 homes, if everyone gets disconnected, but given the nature of the legislature, it seems like that could very well be both the intent and the result. That's more or less where we were until recently. Suddenlink is building in the area. It's almost one of the very few areas in which Altus, which I believe owns Suddenlink now, is expanding in the United States right now, foregoing much better opportunities in places like Texas and lots of other places. They are building to a small amount of Pine Tops. But fortunately for the people of Pine Tops, there is a buyer for the network, and Greenlight has decided to sell the network. The city of Wilson is selling the network to a private company that will be able to operate it. So that's certainly a success for the people of Pine Tops that we met in the film. But I wanted to just note that there's a number of notes I have here, but I'm trying to keep it short. The reason that we're playing this, I think, is certainly not because we think everyone in here should build a municipal network. And I'm always concerned about that when we play it, because many of you might be from communities in which that's not the best solution. But it is an inspiring story, and it's a reminder that we can do things. And the way that the people in Pine Tops reacted, I think, is important, because they didn't really pay attention in 2011 when that law was passed, but as soon as they got that internet access and saw how valuable it was, it changed them. They were probably aware of people moving into Wilson to get access to this network. Wilson's seen remarkable job growth in a part of a state that's been devastated by the downfall of manufacturing, the fall of the tobacco economy, and other things. So this has been, it's a tremendous success for Wilson, but we don't want other people to think that this is something that's easy to do or they should run off and do. It's more important to recognize that we can solve these problems locally. And then the other thing that I wanted to get through, which I don't think we've done a good job of entirely, I know I have not done a good job of, is dealing with this issue of partisanship, because it's really frustrating for me as someone who is, my organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, frankly, we're frustrated with Democrats and Republicans. But if you look at Colorado, where 100 communities have passed referenda to reclaim their authority to build networks or to engage in partnerships. We ran the numbers, and places that voted for Trump, like 75% voted yes, voted 80% for Trump. Places that voted 80% for Hillary or 80% for Barack, they passed those referendums with overwhelming majorities. On the ground, this is not partisan in any way. But at the state level, and at the federal level even worse, it is very partisan. At the state level, it is mostly Republican legislators that are trying to block this, with some Democrats helping them. At the federal level, it's almost entirely Republicans with almost no Democrats opposing local decision making in this. So I just wanted to sort of throw that dynamic out there because, if you look at John Chambers, who's going to be up here in a minute, and ask him about partisanship, he doesn't know how the people vote when he's working with them in the communities. Most of us don't when we work in rural communities. It doesn't come up. But there is a partisan dynamic that I don't want to deny to it. So if there's any brief questions, it's very clear in my mind how all this stuff happens, but I realize that sometimes in the audience, you might have some basic questions. So I just have a minute or two to answer any questions about what's been happening in Wilson and Pine Tops. I don't think there is a microphone up here. Oh. There's a question back here.
Thanks, Deb. Did the community have any input as to which private company they sold their network to, and were there any guarantees on pricing or that it would stay the same or accessible?
Yeah, I actually do not know the answer to that. But I can say that Wilson is one of the most professional operators that I've seen in truly looking out for the communities. And they did an RFP. I believe there's an established process they had to follow. And I would absolutely trust that Wilson is doing everything they can to try and ensure that they're getting a really good buyer. And I would say that in my experience, a lot of local firms do a really good job of keeping prices affordable and trying to serve their communities. When you hear complaints about the private companies, it's typically the bigger ones. There's a question over on the other side, Deb, if you want to.
It's okay, getting my exercise.
The next question will have to come up from over here.
Thank you. Just a comment. I have the pleasure of working with Wilson, North Carolina, in some things, and some commentary that I think would be beneficial to everyone here who's looking to speak with them or something along those lines is that they're very open to new technologies and trying them out, right? So if someone wants to come and show what they do and how it's going to impact the community in a positive, they're extremely open to discussing that with you. They also partner with other cities quite well, like Cary, North Carolina, and working through different test bed environments. So I can just say that they're a great example of doing the right thing for their community. So that's really is not necessarily a question, but that Will and the whole team there are extremely professional. And when I first met them, I had all kinds of questions as a skeptic, but it was incredible what they do.
There's our last question's over here.
And I'll just mention on my way over is one of the things we do a lot of is connecting communities like Wilson with folks who are thinking about doing something similar, or a public-private partnership or an open access network. We support all of the above.
I'll try and frame this as a question. Don't you think that in a democracy that the people should be the ones who have the power and not the corporate interests necessarily? If you want a true democracy, corporations get their charters from states. People should be able to control what those corporations do. And so doesn't democracy preempt corporate rights?
It should. I think that's one of the things that I think we're going to see over the next several decades is interesting coalitions to try to recover some local decision making and that sort of thing, and interesting left-right combinations along that. I encourage you to think about doing a public showing of this film. Certainly talk to Deb or myself if you'd like to find out how. There's no cost necessarily. Sometimes there's a very minor licensing fee, but really the challenge is just setting it up in your community. is the only thing you'd have to worry about if you wanted to do that. My colleague Hannah has created a packet of information to help you, guide you through that process that's available, and Deb and I can certainly distribute that to anyone. And I wanted to close the Pine Tops discussion by noting that Pine Tops is ending up with a terrific network, and in fact more choices than almost anywhere around them. But there are many other communities, and in fact, in the film, there was this young man from Macclesfield, and he's nearby. They don't have any access to the internet really to speak of. There's farms around that area that are struggling, that are not connected. So just because Pine Tops is still going to be connected at the end doesn't change the injustice of this at all. So with that, I'm going to do my last thing up here, and as I roll into that, I do want to say that Deb, Anna,